Imagine this. You're in Germany.
Yeah.
It's 1935. You're waiting in a really long line.
Uh-huh.
Not for, like a concert or a new iPhone,
Right.
but for a little piece of butter.
Wow.
And there are police officers everywhere, watching everyone like hawks, making sure nobody takes more than their tiny ration. This was the reality for a lot of Germans. People struggling to feed their families, while their leader was busy building up this huge military fueler.
It's kind of a crazy paradox, isn't it? How did Hitler convince an entire nation to sacrifice so much, to put up with real hardship for his grand vision?
Well, it's a question that still fascinates historians and anyone really who looks back at this time. To really understand it, we need to dig into history, explore Hitler's core beliefs, his understanding of human psychology, and how he took advantage of a world that was still recovering from World War I. Okay, so let's get right into it. Today we're looking at those crucial years between 1933, when Hitler became chancellor, and 1936, when he remilitarized the Rhineland. We'll see how he consolidated power, rebuilt Germany's military, and played this high-stakes game on the world stage, all while his own people were dealing with economic problems.
We're going to use firsthand accounts and historical analysis, and we'll keep coming back to that central question. How did Hitler, a man who started out in the beer halls of Munich, seemingly defy the odds, break free from the Treaty of Versailles, and turn Germany back into a major power?
If you find yourself interested in these big moments in history, make sure you subscribe to The Deep Dive. That's where we unpack the stories of the people and the events that have shaped our world. Now let's start by trying to understand Hitler's vision for Germany. There's a really revealing passage from Mein Kampf written back in 1925, years before he came to power. This gives us a glimpse into his core beliefs, the very foundation of his political career.
It's super important to understand this because this is the basis of his whole ideology. Every decision he made, here's the quote, "Nature knows no political frontiers. She begins by establishing life on this globe and then watches the free play of forces. Those who show the greatest courage and industry are the children nearest to her heart, and they will be granted the sovereign right of existence. Man has become great through perpetual struggle. In perpetual peace, his greatness must decline."
That's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
And kind of disturbing, too. What he's basically saying is that conflict and war are necessary for human progress. It's like he's applying Darwin's theories to justify violence.
Exactly. He truly believed that struggle, even war, wasn't just inevitable but essential for advancement. And this wasn't just about individuals, it was about whole nations. He saw Germany as destined for greatness, a dominant force that needed to expand its territory and reclaim its place on the world stage.
And this idea of living space, Lebensraum, like the Nazis called it, that was a key part of his plans, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Hitler believed that Germany needed to expand eastward, to get more territory, to secure its future, and to support its growing population. This idea of Lebensraum, it really resonated with Germans. They were still hurting from their defeat in World War I. They wanted to be proud of their country again, and Hitler offered them a way back to greatness, a vision of a powerful and expanding German Reich.
So he was tapping into this deep well of resentment and ambition that hadn't been fulfilled. But how did this translate into action once he became chancellor in 1933?
One of his first moves was to get the support of a group that could have easily stopped him. The army. Many of these high-ranking officers, they were veterans of World War I. They were wary of this former corporal. He'd risen to power through politics, not military achievements.
It's amazing to think about that first meeting between Hitler and the top German military leaders. What was it like? How did he get them to support him?
Imagine a room full of tension, suspicion, a clash of ideologies. Hitler. He was a master of persuasion. He needed to win over these skeptical generals. He did it by cleverly aligning his goals with what they wanted.
So how did he do that? What did he say to get their support?
He focused on two main things that the army also wanted. First, crushing Marxism, which appealed to their conservative beliefs and their fear of communism spreading. Second, getting living space in the East, which tapped into their desire to see Germany regain its lost territories and rebuild its military strength. By framing his ambitions in a way that matched the army's own worldview, Hitler got their crucial backing.
So he was basically saying, hey, we have the same goals. Let's work together to make Germany great again. And this all led to his next big move, right?
Exactly. With the army on his side, Hitler felt confident enough to start one of his biggest initiatives, a massive rearmament program that went way beyond the limits of the Treaty of Versailles. He cleverly argued that a strong military wasn't just about national security. It was also essential for economic recovery. It was brilliant. He linked military expansion with economic prosperity, and it appealed to a nation that desperately wanted both.
You know, a lot of people think that the Autobahn project was part of this economic recovery plan. I remember learning in school that those highways were mostly about creating jobs. Is that true?
That's actually a misconception. While the Autobahn project did create jobs, the main reason Hitler wanted it was strategic. He saw those highways as ways to move troops and equipment quickly. A crucial part of his military buildup, economic stimulus was a side benefit, not the main goal.
That's really interesting. So he was playing the long game, hiding his military ambitions behind this idea of economic recovery. But how did ordinary Germans feel about all this focus on rearmament, especially when the economy was still struggling?
It's complicated. The rearmament program, even with the strain it put on resources and the shortages it caused, it actually appealed to different groups of Germans. For conservatives and business elites, it represented a return to a powerful Germany, fulfilling their dream of national resurgence and global influence.
And for the average German citizen, tired of economic hardship and the shame of defeat, the promise of a strong Germany was really powerful.
Exactly. Even workers who were facing shortages and rationing, they found pride in producing weapons. They felt like they were helping to rebuild their nation.
So Hitler was weaving together all these different things: national pride, economic anxiety, the longing for a strong Germany, and he used it to get support for his plans.
Exactly. And this was all happening while the rest of Europe watched worried and unsure, still haunted by World War I, and not knowing how to respond to this newly assertive Germany.
This is where things start to get really interesting. Hitler wasn't happy with just rearming Germany. He started taking risks on the world stage, testing the Allies, pushing the boundaries to see how far he could go.
One of his first bold moves was walking out of the League of Nations disarmament talks in 1933. It was brilliant propaganda. It made Germany look like the victim of unfair treatment by the world, and it got him sympathy from those who thought the Treaty of Versailles was too harsh.
It was a PR masterclass. He played the victim while secretly rebuilding his military. He got around the treaty's limitations, and at the same time, he made himself look reasonable, like he was wronged by the global powers. And this tactic worked over and over again, didn't it?
It did. He understood how important perception was, and he used it to his advantage. Like in 1934, when he signed a non-aggression pact with Poland. It shocked Europe. It basically broke up the French alliance system. It isolated France and created cracks in the post-war order.
So he was breaking up the alliances that were meant to contain Germany while building up his own military and pretending to be a peacemaker.
Precisely. He was a master of exploiting the Allies' guilt and their fear of another war, especially in Britain. He sensed their hesitation to confront him, and he used it to chip away at the Treaty of Versailles and expand his influence.
This all leads up to what many consider a turning point: the remilitarization of the Rhineland in 1936. This was breaking the Treaty of Versailles, and could easily started a big war. What made Hitler think he could get away with it?
Well, there were a few things that gave him the confidence to do it. First, the Strasse Front. That was a short-lived alliance between Britain, France, and Italy. It had collapsed after Italy invaded Abyssinia. The Allies weren't united, and that made Hitler think he could test their limits.
So there were cracks in their united front. It's like he was waiting for the right moment to make his move.
That's a great way to put it. And then on top of that, there was the Anglo-German Naval Agreement. Britain wanted to protect its own navy, so they allowed Germany to have a limited navy. This further weakened the united front against Hitler. It showed him that he could play the Allies against each other.
So he saw both the divisions among the Allies and their willingness to appease him to avoid a fight. And there's one more thing, isn't there? Something that made him even more sure that he could remilitarize the Rhineland.
Yeah, the Allies made a big mistake with their intelligence. They thought the German force entering the Rhineland was much smaller than it actually was. This miscalculation made Hitler look even more powerful and daring, which made him even bolder.
So he was working with bad information. He saw weakness where there might have been more strength, and he saw an opportunity to do something bold, something that would change the balance of power in Europe.
Exactly. He was great at reading the political situation, taking advantage of opportunities, taking calculated risks, and the remilitarization of the Rhineland would be one of his most successful and consequential gambles.
And he did it with his usual dramatic flair. We have vivid descriptions of his announcement in the Kroll Opera House on March 7th, 1936, as German troops were marching into the Rhineland.
It was a staged spectacle designed to get a strong emotional response from the German people. Picture it, a packed opera house. The air is thick with anticipation. Hitler, a master of rhetoric and emotional manipulation. He builds up his speech, talking about Germany's grievances, the injustices of the Treaty of Versailles, the symbolic importance of the Rhineland.
It must have been electric when he reached the climax of his speech, announcing that German troops were at that very moment marching into the Rhineland, reclaiming what many Germans believed was rightfully theirs.
The reaction was explosive. The deputies were cheering. Some were crying. A wave of nationalistic fervor swept through the crowd. It was a powerful expression of how much they wanted Germany to be restored, and Hitler had tapped into that perfectly.
It's such a contrast to the reaction in Paris and London. Disbelief, anger, and in the end paralysis. The French, even though they had the military power to stop Hitler, they were divided internally. They were haunted by the horrors of the last war, and they didn't want to risk another one. This hesitation, this fear of war, it would turn out to be a fatal mistake.
It was a turning point in history. The remilitarization of the Rhineland changed the balance of power in Europe. It emboldened Hitler. It made him look like a decisive leader who kept his promises. And, maybe most importantly, it showed the world that he was a force to be reckoned with, a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted.
So by the end of 1936, just 3 years after coming to power, Hitler had defied the Treaty of Versailles, built a powerful military, and secured strategic alliances, all while maintaining control over the German people.
He did what many thought was impossible. He transformed a defeated and demoralized nation into a major European power. But the question is, were these successes inevitable? Were there missed opportunities to stop him? To choose diplomacy over aggression and prevent the catastrophe that was to come? These are questions that still haunt historians, and anyone who looks back at this time.
It's scary to think about the possibility that things could have been different. And it leads us to another interesting part of Hitler's story, the man behind the mask. We've talked about his grand vision, his calculated risks, his manipulations on the world stage. But there was another side to him, a personal side that reveals a strange contradiction in this seemingly all-powerful dictator.
It is fascinating, isn't it? Because even though he projected this image of strength and determination, Hitler was actually plagued by health problems and a surprising amount of insecurity. He was a hypochondriac, obsessed with his health, always afraid of getting cancer.
We have stories of him having stomach spasms, skin rashes, a constant fear of cancer. It doesn't fit the image of the steely-eyed dictator.
And it gets even weirder. There are reports of him taking quack medicines, like drinking gun-cleaning oil, trying to cure himself. It's bizarre. It almost makes this larger-than-life figure seem human.
It's like we're peeking behind the curtain, seeing the wizard for what he really is.
Yeah.
A flawed, insecure human being, but one with incredibly dangerous ambitions.
It's an important reminder that even the most powerful people are still human, with all their complexities and contradictions. And in Hitler's case, these complexities and contradictions would have devastating consequences for the world.
So as we continue exploring, keep this in mind. We're not just dealing with a historical figure, we're dealing with a real person, driven by ideology, ambition, personal demons. And this combination would prove to be a dangerous cocktail, leading the world to the brink of war. But we'll dig deeper into that in the next part of our deep dive.
So that gamble in the Rhineland, that was a real turning point, not just for the military, but psychologically made Hitler believe in his own destiny. Like he really could reshape the world the way he wanted.
It's like a gambler who keeps winning, right? Every win makes them think they can't lose. They start taking bigger and bigger risks.
Exactly. And in Hitler's case, the stakes were huge. The fate of nations, millions of lives. He wasn't just trying to change the Treaty of Versailles anymore. He wanted a whole new world order with Germany in charge.
And this is where his ideology, which was already pretty disturbing, takes a really dark turn. His goals become terrifyingly clear. There's this chilling quote from a memo he sent to his cabinet at the end of 1936.
He wrote, "We are approaching a confrontation with world Jewry, for which Bolshevism is really just the front. This is going to be an all-out existential struggle. We must be fit for war in 4 years."
It's a reminder of how deeply anti-Semitic the Nazis were. It's important to understand that Hitler didn't just see other countries as enemies. He saw an entire group of people, a race that he blamed for Germany's problems.
This belief in a fight for survival against world Jewry, as he called it, became a driving force behind everything he did. It fueled his determination to rearm no matter the cost, to prepare for a war that he saw as inevitable and necessary for the survival of the German people, or at least his twisted version of them.
And he didn't just talk about it. He took real steps to get ready for this war. He started this radical economic plan called autarky. Can you explain what that was and how it affected ordinary Germans?
Autarky was basically self-sufficiency. Hitler wanted Germany to be completely independent from the rest of the world economically and in terms of resources, so they'd be ready for a total war. This meant rationing, prioritizing military production over consumer goods, controlling every part of the economy.
So those images we talked about, empty grocery shelves, police watching over butter sales, that was because of autarky.
Exactly. The average German was asked to make huge sacrifices, to go without, to endure hardship, all for the sake of national survival and future glory. It's a big contrast to the excitement over the Rhineland.
It shows that Hitler's regime, even though it was popular at first, demanded a lot from its citizens. It's almost a contradiction. He offered a vision of greatness, but at the same time, he made life harder for his own people.
That's a really important point. And he was able to keep some level of support by constantly pointing to enemies and scapegoats, especially Jews and communists, and by promising future glory once Germany achieved its rightful place in the world.
He was a master manipulator, wasn't he? He used fear and national pride to justify his actions, which were becoming more and more aggressive, both inside Germany and on the world stage. And this desire to expand wasn't limited to Germany's borders, was it? He started making alliances with other dictators, which really worried the democracies of Europe.
You're right. One of his most important alliances was with Mussolini's Italy. They formed the Axis powers. This partnership became even stronger when they fought together in the Spanish Civil War. It wasn't just about shared beliefs. It was a chance for them to test their militaries and their tactics for future conflicts.
So the Spanish Civil War became like a practice run for World War II, a tragic preview of the horrors that were to come. It gave the German military, especially the Air Force, a chance to gain experience and improve their strategies for bombing.
Exactly. And these alliances went even further. In 1936, Germany signed the Anti-Comintern Pact with Japan, extending its reach and threatening the existing world order.
This pact, even though it was supposed to be about fighting communism, was really about creating a group of powerful nations, all united in their opposition to the way things were and their desire to reshape the world according to their own ideology.
Precisely. They all felt like they'd been wronged by the current world order, and they wanted to change it.
So by the end of 1936, just 3 years after taking power, Hitler had turned Germany from a defeated nation into a major military power with strong allies. He had skillfully used the weaknesses of the democracies. He'd broken international agreements, and he'd laid the foundation for a radical new order. It's an incredibly fast rise. It shows how cunning he was, how ambitious he was, and how the world failed to see the real danger he posed.
And as we move into the late 1930s, the question is no longer if Hitler will act, but where and when. He wants to expand, and his vision for a greater Germany, driven by his ideology and his belief in his own destiny, will inevitably lead to conflict.
And his next target will be Austria, a country with deep cultural and historical ties to Germany. But before we get into that, let's take a step back and think about something interesting about Hitler's personality. We've talked about his grand vision, his calculated risks, and his manipulations on the world stage. But what about the man himself? What was he like in private?
That's a fascinating question, isn't it? Because even though he projected this image of strength and determination, Hitler was by many accounts plagued by health problems and a surprising level of personal insecurity.
There's stories about him having stomach spasms, skin rashes, and a constant fear of cancer. It's hard to reconcile that with the image of the all-powerful, fearless dictator.
It is, and it gets even more interesting. There are reports of him taking strange medicines, including, believe it or not, drinking gun-cleaning oil trying to cure himself. It's a bizarre detail that adds another layer to this complex and contradictory figure.
Makes him seem human in a way, doesn't it? It reminds us that even the most ruthless dictators are still human beings with anxieties and fears.
It does. And it raises fascinating questions about how much his personal insecurities and health issues might have influenced his decision-making.
It's almost like we're looking behind the curtain and seeing the wizard for what he truly is, a flawed, insecure human being, albeit one with incredibly dangerous ambitions.
That's a powerful image, and it's crucial to keep this in mind as we delve deeper into his actions. We're not dealing with an abstract historical figure, but a real person driven by a potent mix of ideology, ambition, personal demons, and perhaps a desperate desire to compensate for his own perceived weaknesses.
And this combination, as we'll see, would have devastating consequences for the world. We left off with Hitler feeling really confident and with his sights set on Austria. It's 1937. The world is watching nervously as this dictator driven by ideology and ambition is getting ready to make his next move.
The annexation of Austria, or Anschluss, as the Nazis called it, it wasn't just about getting more land. It was personal for Hitler. Austria was where he was born, and he saw uniting it with Germany as a dream come true.
And he wasn't exactly hiding his intentions. We know he told his propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, that Austria was the next target, and that he was willing to use force to get it. A chilling reminder of how ruthless he was.
And he wasn't all talk. On November 9th, 1937, he called his military leaders to the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. This meeting was a big moment. He laid out his plans for taking over Austria and expanding the German Reich.
So take us inside that room. What happened at that meeting? What were Hitler's plans, and how did his generals react?
It was a tense and dramatic scene. Hitler, driven by his belief in destiny and growing impatient, laid out his vision for a greater Germany with Austria as the first step. He argued that bringing Austria into the fold wasn't just about national pride. It was strategically necessary for Germany's security and future dominance.
But he wasn't talking about a peaceful merger, was he? Hitler made it clear that he was ready to use military force to get what he wanted.
Oh, he was absolutely ready to use force. He outlined a plan for a quick and decisive invasion to overwhelm any resistance from Austria and present the world with a done deal.
And how did his generals respond to this? Were they all on board with this aggressive plan?
His generals, while they generally liked the idea of Anschluss, they were a little more cautious. They were worried about what other countries might do, the risk of starting a war with the other European powers, especially Italy.
Italy under Mussolini had been a key ally. They'd fought together in the Spanish Civil War, and their partnership was a cornerstone of the Axis powers.
But Austria was a sensitive issue for Mussolini, wasn't it? Yeah. Austria was tricky. Mussolini saw it as being in Italy's sphere of influence and had even threatened to use military force to stop Germany from taking it over just a few years earlier.
So the generals had good reason to be concerned. Hitler's plan could alienate a crucial ally and upset the balance of power in Europe.
Their concerns were valid for sure, but Hitler, like we know, wasn't easily swayed. He was determined to go ahead, confident that he could outsmart his opponents and get what he wanted without starting a bigger conflict.
He seemed to have an almost uncanny ability to predict how other nations would react. What made him so sure he could get away with taking over Austria?
He believed that the other European powers, especially Britain and France, were too weak and divided to do anything about it. He'd seen how reluctant they were to challenge him directly, their appeasement policy, and he was betting they would back down again.
So he was willing to risk the peace of Europe to get what he wanted, and sadly he was right. When the time came, the world didn't do much to stop him.
That's the truth. In March of 1938, Hitler put his plan into action. He created a political crisis in Austria, supporting Austrian Nazis who were trying to destabilize the government and give him an excuse to intervene. Then, with the threat of invasion looming, he forced the Austrian chancellor to agree to a bunch of demands that basically gave control of the country to the Nazis.
It was a masterful display of political manipulation and military intimidation, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He got what he wanted without firing a single shot.
It was a perfect example of how to take over territory using political pressure and the threat of overwhelming force. And on March 12, 1938, German troops marched into Austria, greeted not with resistance but with cheering crowds. The Anschluss was complete.
And how did the world react?
The world was shocked and didn't do much. Britain and France, even though they had warned Hitler before, only offered weak protests. They weren't willing to risk a war over Austria, and Hitler knew it. He had called their bluff again and won.
So what can we learn from this moment in history? It's a story of ambition, risk-taking, and the tragic failure of the world to stand up to a dictator.
It shows how dangerous appeasement can be. While it's often done to try and keep the peace, it can actually encourage aggressors and make war more likely in the long run.
It also raises important questions about leadership and what happens when someone has too much power. The world had seen what Hitler was capable of, yet they didn't do enough to stop him from doing it again.
It's a reminder that we always need to be protecting democracy and freedom. The same things that allowed Hitler to rise to power still exist today. We need to learn from the mistakes of the past and be ready to stand up to tyranny wherever it appears.
That's a powerful message to end on. Hitler's rise to power, from those early days in the beer halls to the annexation of Austria, is a warning from history. It shows how a charismatic leader can use fear, resentment, and national pride to control a nation and threaten the peace of the world.
His story, while unsettling, gives us valuable lessons about the importance of vigilance, the fragility of peace, and the need to defend democratic values against those who want to destroy them.
And that brings our deep dive to a close today. We've explored Hitler's ideology, his rise to power, and his calculated moves on the European stage, culminating in the annexation of Austria. We've talked about his personal complexities and the world's hesitant response to his aggression.
It's a complex and multifaceted story with lessons that are still relevant today.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through a crucial part of history. Make sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations of the people and events that have shaped our world. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep thinking critically.